Okay. Good afternoon, all the participants and distinguished guests. As we all know, that Institute of Social and Cultural Studies, which as an autonomous organization, have been addressing interesting aspects through research and regular documentation, and of course, events. It's a pleasure for us to have Mr. Victor Zico with us, who's a very passionate climber, mountaineer, photographer, and a videographer from Hungary, who initiated and completed an expedition from Hungary to Darjeeling in the year 2020. And today we have him as a distinguished speaker, and we will be glad to know about interesting aspects of his expedition as well as challenges. It is also a pleasure for us to have um, Dr. Shotabrata Chakraborty, General Secretary, the Asiatic Society, Kolkata. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us. He would be chairing the session. And of course, as a keynote speaker, Ambassador Tuhin Kumar, Director General, IPCR New Delhi, and of course, a former ambassador of India to Hungary. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us. I would first like to request Dr. Shotabrata Chakraborty for his address as a distinguished chair.
Thank you, madam, and very good morning to everybody who are present in this international webinar. Let me first of all express my personal gratitude to Dr. Arindam Mukherjee, the Director of the Institute for Social and Cultural Studies, India, for very kindly allowing me to be associated with this important and novel program. And in fact, this novelty accrues on account of many reasons, more than one. First of all, the central figure of our discourse today, Alexander Chomadekorus, almost lived 1/5 of his stint in India, especially in Calcutta, now Kolkata, and especially in the Asiatic Society, doing a lot of very fundamental nature of research that will come little later. That is number one. And second, incidentally, I occupy the position of the General Secretary of that premier institution of learning and research at the moment. And the third is our today's speaker, keynote address speaker, Ambassador Tuhin Kumar, Director General, Indian Council of Cultural Relations, New Delhi, who was also the ambassador of India to Hungary and who had, to his credit, the first-hand exposure and interactions in that country. Last but not the least, our distinguished speaker, Victor Zico, who is using this occasion as a mark of completion of 200 years of the journey of that hermit scholar, which started in 1819. And as he named the very topic of the discourse, the Alexander Choma expedition. And as I understand, he had also had the unique experience of traveling to the last destination where Choma was laid to rest in 1842. And on the way, he made his journey with a bicycle, while Choma himself at point of time made his journey on foot. That we will refer a little later on. So this was precisely the context of today's meeting, where I would request our keynote speaker, Mr. Tuhin Kumar, to first initiate the discussion. But before that, May I request Dr. Arindam Mukherjee to kindly formally introduce Mr. Tuhin Kumar.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Chakraborty. Ambassador Tuhin Kumar is at present Director General of ICCR, and we all know that he is former Ambassador of India to Hungary. Few months back in Delhi, when I met Ambassador Kumar, he told me about Victor. And that time I immediately told Ambassador that we want to arrange a program. And immediately he said, yes, you can arrange. I will talk with Victor. He is very close to me. Actually, this is the background of today's event. And Ambassador Tuhin Kumar is very enthusiastic person, very learned person. He is very good friend of Hungary also. So I will request Ambassador Tuhin Kumar for his address. Thank you.
So, Mr. Tuhin Kumar, please.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by acknowledging Dr. Chakraborty, who is presiding over today's meeting, Dr. Arindam Mukherjee, my good friend, and also my very dear friend, Victor Zico, who is joining us today online. It's wonderful to see him after many months. I left Hungary in November, and before that, we had chance to meet him a few times in 21, and also, of course, in 2020, when he had returned from his trip to India. So let me begin by mentioning that a tale of bicycler, which we are chronicling today, is not only the story of Mr. Victor Zico, his remarkable journey actually on a bicycle from Hungary to India, and retracing the footsteps of the illustrious person, Mr. Alexander Choma Karas, who was in India few hundred years ago. And that was also a remarkable journey in which he not only was trying to retrace the origin of Hungarian people, but also during his stay in India and during his studies and the work that he did, he created some of those milestone actually books and literature, which even now are reference books for Hungarian and Sanskrit and Tibetan. And in doing so, he has actually created a strong bridge of friendship between India and Hungary. So what Victor did actually in retracing his path on bicycle was not only rekindling the memories of Alexander Choma Karashi, but also creating an example now for the present day youth, and that we're setting an example for future generations to come. This was not a small feat, because we actually, even traveling by flight, we have to suffer sometimes, jet lag, etc. But traveling a long journey, and that too so many continents, different terrain, difficult terrain. And when I was talking to him last time, he was telling me in his presentation how he was able to meet with different people. For example, in India, he was telling me that he stayed in many gurudwaras, and in Punjab also sometimes staying in tents in open fields, and thus he made many friends. So this experience that he has now accumulated, and this treasure of friends that he has created, I think this is a remarkable thing. It is a call of mountains and call of India that is bringing him again and again to India. I'm again, am I still audible?
Yes.
Okay. So, without taking too much of time, let me mention a few personal anecdotes relating to Victor's stay in India that may be of interest to people. I was, of course, then as ambassador in Hungary, and I got a message from one of the friends that there was a Hungarian person in the state of Bihar, the state where I come from, and that he was facing some issues there. So of course it aroused my curiosity, and then of course I established contact with Hungarian ambassador in India, and I was told that yes, we had a Hungarian citizen in India, and because of COVID, he had been quarantined in a hospital in the city of Chhapra, and that place he was facing some trouble because one day before his passport and some other stuff had been lost, and because of which he will face, of course, difficulties in coming back. So since I knew the state and since I knew some of the officials there, I volunteered to speak to a friend and volunteered to speak to the local authorities. And fortunately, after I spoke and their intervention, his passport and some other documents, they were retrieved very quickly. I think there was also some cash and his wallet that was lost while he was staying in the hospital. That was also recovered. When I was doing that, I realized that person like him who was undertaking this big journey, it would be how should I describe it? Not a very pleasant moment if some of his valuables were to be lost. And therefore, I also spoke to a friend there and told him to personally go to the hospital and speak to him and also connect me on phone to him. So after a few hours, my friend managed to speak to Victor on phone and connected me to him there. I inquired and he was fine. He was of course, he was in good spirits. Of course, only thing he mentioned was that the same food which he was eating for a few days, and that food was same food for the last few days. So I mentioned this to him, and this, of course, brought some of those memories actually back to him. Now, here what I would like to mention is that sometimes we look for examples, and again in Victor we find a very good example, and this example is that he not only then he will connect youth of this period, but he will actually also be then a role model who will be joining many generations together. So this is what I wanted to mention, that in doing so, Victor was not only a small journey, but actually Victor that way brought two countries together. And this is what I would like to highlight here in our presentation. Maybe I think I should stop here, and I would like to mention something when we are discussing. But at the moment, let me just stop here and bring Victor Zico back here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tuhin Kumar, for your brief but very succinct intervention, and also little brief about our today's guest speaker, Victor Zico. Now, may I request Mr. Victor Zico to please share with us his exciting moments during the journey in India. Mr. Victor?
Victor is still here.
Mr. Victor Zico, are you hearing us?
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yeah, please.
It's great. Great. But I was sharing my screen. I'm trying to share my screen. Can you see my shared screen?
Yes, we can all see it.
Can you see this image?
Yes.
All right, that's great. So let me start. Let me begin at the beginning of the journey. Thank you very much for hosting this meeting and for the invitation. My name is Victor Zico. I'm an extreme sports athlete, and I read Alexander Chuma's diary in 2014, and the fact that he decided to make researches about Hungarian roots, and the way that he implemented this, and the way that he traveled to Asia, the way that he traveled to Asia and stick to this original aim, it absolutely inspired me and obsessed me. So finally I decided to ride my bicycle from Hungary to India, and to make, oh my god, to follow his footsteps and to salute him, and make a journey in his footsteps. So finally I decided to set out in 2019 as the bicentenary of the departure of this great researcher and philologist. So I started from Hungary and went to Transylvania, to Alexander Csoma's birthplace. This place is called Csomagkörös, where he was born. And he has a house of a commemorial house where I visited. And these people around me, they gave me these tricolor Hungarian national flags and these walnuts. And my own mission was to take these things from Hungary all the way to India only by bicycle. And what's the reason why I was riding a bicycle? Well, Alexander Csoma, obviously, he didn't ride a bicycle, as there were no bikes at that time. And well, first of all, I grew up on a bike, and that became part of my life. Cycling became part of my life. And as a second thing, cycling is really sustainable. It is one of the greenest ways of transportation. And for me, sustainability is a very important aspect that I have to share with society. So the great departure was at Alexander Csoma's statue in Csomagkörös, where I started the trip and headed towards the Balkans. And I entered Turkey, and I was wilderness camping in the steppes and also in many abandoned places. And the weather was quite hot, and even the asphalt melted. So the bitumen was flowing on the asphalt, and there was the stick on my wheel, and it brought some gravel on my wheel. It was quite hard to proceed. So I finally arrived in Antalya, which is the seacoast of the Mediterranean Sea, and I had a concept to follow Alexander Csoma's road as near as possible. So I couldn't continue all the way where he was traveling, because he took a ferry, he took a boat from Greece to Egypt, and this ferry doesn't exist nowadays, so I couldn't take this ferry and I couldn't go through the sea. So I decided I'm following his footsteps as close as possible. I mean, I had to ride on the seacoast from here. So I arrived in Urfa, which is a caravan destination point, a caravan where the caravans stop, and the members of the caravan have an overnight. So he changed the caravan here, and he continued his way to Baghdad through the Tigris River, the Tiger River. And right after that, he crossed the Zagros Mountains, and I also crossed this mountains, and this was the first high mountain pass I was passing. It was at 2,600 meters, and it was a half day of climbing with a bike. I mean, I was pushing the bike mostly because it was quite tough. And after passing this mountain pass, on the right hand side, I saw that there were people sitting on a carpet right next to the roadside, and it was it was really funny that these three old people are sitting on this carpet and they're eating watermelon. And they immediately stopped me and they said that I should join them and have a tea, and they want to share this watermelon with me. Then I arrived at Tehran and I stayed 5 days together with my friend Reza. He's a Persian person, and I stayed 5 days. But compared to this, Alexander Choma, he stayed 5 months in Tehran. What's the reason why? Why did he have to stay 5 months in a place like that? Well, Alexander was a really he was a really proud person, and that's why he didn't accept any support from anybody in his hometown, in his home country, in Hungary. And he decided to travel only by his spared money. So it was his decision, but he underestimated, and all his spare money was over by reaching Tehran. So finally he had to stop and ask help at the British embassy, and finally they helped him, and he could stay there 5 months. He could stay at the embassy. They provided him food and accommodation, new clothes, and some money as well. But he eventually wrote a letter back home to request this time for some financial help. So after that, I continued my way to East Iran, and I crossed the Chalus Road, which is a huge mountain road in the north part of Iran. And I ended up in northeast Iran, and that's where I ran out of money, because Iran has a total financial embargo towards Europe, so you cannot access your bank account, you cannot access your bank card. All you have is cash there. So I only had $25 cash left when I entered Turkmenistan. And when I was at the entrance at the immigration of Turkmenistan, they requested me to pay $24 extra for entering the country, and that's how I had only $1 left. So I had to travel through Turkmenistan with this $1, as I tried to get some money withdrawn from ATMs, but I couldn't get any. So finally, I had to cross this desert, which was 550 kilometers of desert ride. I had to cross it with this $1, which was not easy. I mean, I could only buy some rice, and I had some remaining bread, which was hard as a stone. So that's how I could cross this desert. I saw many camels, and that's absolutely normal phenomenon in this Turkmenistan desert, in the Karakum Desert. And finally, I arrived in Bukhara, which is a changing point in Alexander Choma's route. He aims to continue his trip towards northeast, to reach Samarkand and go further to to West China and Mongolia, because um, he felt that the origin of Hungarians was in Mongolia. So his aim was to make discoveries, to make to explore the Hungarians' origins and to get to Mongolia, but he couldn't because there was a really strange situation in Bukhara, as the Russian Empire tried to occupy this area of Uzbekistan, and everyone was afraid. And Alexander was in disguise. He had to travel in disguise because in these years in Bukhara there was slavery, and due to slavery, when it turned out about someone that he's he's from Europe or he is Christian, then he immediately became a slave in Bukhara. So it was a high threat from the Russians that they want to occupy Bukhara, and there was a very bad scenario about him that if they reveal that he is from Europe, they might even suspect him as a spy. So it might be really, really bad for him, as they can also kill him because of this fact. So finally, he decided to leave Bukhara and head towards southeast to enter Afghanistan. And I also continued this way and went to Tajikistan first, as there were some issues in Afghanistan because there was civil war in some parts of Afghanistan, and I could only enter the country's east parts, Badakhshan. So I crossed Tajikistan, which has very bad roads. Most of the roads are not paved in Tajikistan, so I had to change my tires. So I decided to install my mud tires. I mean, these are for gravel roads, but these were second-hand gravel tires. And there was a result of it, because after only 5 kilometers, I had a puncture with it, which is not a real puncture. It was a torn sidewall of the tire. So the sidewall was torn, and I was like, okay, expedition is over. I can't do anything else, and I have to go back, and I have to buy some other mud tires. But I realized that it's possible to put a patch on it. This patch is used only for tubes, but you can also use it for tires. And I patched on the inner side and outer side of the sidewall. So that's how it kept on working. And we do live in a consuming society where everything is about consumption. Get rid of the old one and buy a new one. But that's a very bad philosophy, and that means this causes overconsumption. If you can save the old things, if you can save old items with repairing it, why should you buy a new one? Everything dictates us that you should buy a new one. You should buy a new one of everything, and that is only the generation of waste all the time, which is really not beneficial for us and for the environmental and for sustainability. So I started riding in Tajikistan from the capital, which is called Dushanbe, and I had a company together with me. We were cycling together for, I think, 1 week, and it was great because I cycled the first 7,000 kilometers absolutely alone. I ended up in the valley of Panj River, which is the border river between Tajikistan and Afghanistan. And it was such an adventure, but I had some problems with my stomach. And there was a disease, and it was caused by a parasite. So I had to handle it, and I had to cure myself. So I ended up in Korog, which is a town in South Tajikistan, and I had to spend 2 weeks here to cure myself. And I met Merrick Chase, who is a really famous photographer from the United States, and we made a very good friendship when we hanged out together a lot of time, and we still keep in touch. We still keep in contact almost every second day, and we are planning our next expedition together. So we spent a lot of time together, but after that he had to turn north, and he had to go to Kyrgyzstan, and I had to go south to enter Afghanistan. So this is how I got an Afghan visa, and they issued this Afghan visa in the town of Korog. And I cycled 2 more days in South Tajikistan, which was really amazing in fantastic autumn landscape. I found a hot water spring right next to the road, and there was a small pool which was created next to it, and I just pulled the brakes and just had a break there, because I felt that it is something that I cannot miss. So next day I entered Afghanistan, and it was quite a difficult entry, because they stopped me for a long while and they asked me for a bribe. This is what happens when you're traveling Middle Asia. It's absolutely normal that they require a bribe. So I entered Afghanistan, and I was consulting with people in the first town, which is called Iscs. I was consulting people about where to continue, where to keep on writing, because I wanted to go to Pakistan to enter India, and this was the way. I wanted to go through Kabul and Torkham, because that was the original way where Alexander Choma was walking, and I asked the locals if that's a viable way, and they said I can proceed till Kabul, but after Kabul, if I want to go to Torkham, that would be quite difficult, because they might interrupt me and they might kidnap me, or they might just simply kill me, because that's a Taliban occupied area. So they advised me to keep writing in East Afghanistan, in Badakhshan. So finally I obeyed, and I kept on writing there, and I visited bakery. This one is the only bakery in East Afghanistan, in Badakhshan. No, I mean in the Wakhan corridor, and that's how they make the bread. Well, that's kind of similar to Indian, because this is a tandoor, and they make naan like that. But the baker doesn't really the baker does not deal with small monies, because people, when they enter the shop, the baker's shop, they bring this stick and they make these notches after every sold bread, and after this stick is filled with notches, they count the notches, and that's when they pay, and that's how the workflow is optimized. So the baker doesn't have to deal with the small amounts of money. I had a full day in Sandstorm in Wakhan corridor, and it was really tough. It was really hard to ride my bike, especially because there were really high inclination slopes upside and down. If someone has ridden a bike in such terrain, then they know that it's really tough. I was accommodated in a very small village in Afghanistan. This was my last accommodation. We ended up in a very small brick house, and no, it was not a brick; it was a mud house, and we had a very nice evening. I think it was maximum 8 square meters, and we were like 10 people inside this house. The next day, they showed me the kitchen where the family life happens, and these people were sitting in a jacket inside the room, and that's not because they have just entered from outside. This is because they don't have proper heating. They lack heating. They can only heat up the room, I think, for 10 degrees Celsius, which is not a real high temperature, but they don't suffer from it. The human being is one of the most adaptable race in the world. We can adapt to cold or warm temperatures, humidity, or any extreme conditions, as well as we can also we can also get used to the highest level of comfort. So these people lack energy sources. They don't have gas, they don't have petrol, and they can only heat the room with very small firewood, and it's not sufficient. But they are happy with it, and I'm sure that we overconsume. We really overconsume when we are heating up rooms. That's a lot of energy and a lot of resources and a lot of emission, and that's not sustainable. And if you don't heat the room over, then it causes a lot of energy sparing, and we can spare a lot of emission, which would be unnecessary. Well, I'm an energy engineer, so I approached this topic from this point as well. Outside it was pretty cold. It was -5 degrees Celsius, and there was a snowstorm. There was a blizzard, so they had to bring the small lamb inside. They had to protect him from being cold, because this is what was awaiting for me outside of the room. So I could only proceed on trails which were made by yaks, these high mountain animals, and I could only push my bike further. But there were points where I couldn't even push my bike. I had to drop down the bike, pick up the backpack on my back, and start ascending on a higher inclination slope. So I walked up, I hiked up a little bit, a couple of 100 meters, dropped down the backpack, went back for my bike, got it on my shoulder, and then I carried it like that. So I carried it to the Broghill Pass, and I made this trip 2 times. This is Broghill Pass in the Hindu Kush Mountains, and this mountain pass is located between Afghanistan and Pakistan. This is kind of a border crossing place, which was advised by the locals, because the locals, they cross border here. And I also had a proper Afghan and a proper Pakistani visa, so I didn't think that there would be any issues. But I realized that this is not a proper border crossing area, border crossing place. I crossed this border, I crossed the Hindu Kush Mountains in very similar conditions to how Alexander Choma crossed the Hindu Kush Mountains, because he went through these mountains also in winter time like me, and he crossed also on this elevation 3,800 meters, and he didn't have any accessories, any equipment which would protect him from freezing. So he had to go very quick. Comparing to my comfort, I think he was really suffering, and sometimes I can't even imagine how he could survive. I ended up in Pakistan, which was a really unique new country experience for me because I entered in a very small village, and they invited me for drinks and for food, and then I met some border guards, and these people asked me what I am doing here and where did I enter the country, and I felt like, okay, it is a problem that I didn't enter at a normal entry point, so I lied them because I was too afraid that maybe they will deport me, maybe they will repatriate me to Hungary, and that's what I didn't want. I wanted to avoid it, so I lied them that I entered the country from Torkham. And funny thing is that Alexander Choma also entered Punjab absolutely illegally, similarly to me. You know, in those days, in those years, Pakistan didn't exist. It was only Punjab and Afghanistan. And when he entered Punjab from Afghanistan, he went together with two French soldiers, and they were traveling through all Punjab absolutely illegally, only overnight. So it's quite a big similarity between our trips. So finally, I could ride again alone on mud roads and dirt roads, but I could ride my bike again, which was a great feeling, especially in these areas and especially in these really hospitable people, the most hospitable people I ever experienced in my journeys and travels. They live in the mountain areas of the Hindu Kush Mountains. I couldn't even go and pass any people without receiving an invitation for at least a tea or a meal. I was in Islamabad when my bike broke down absolutely. I had really big troubles with my bicycle, and everything broke on this bike, and we had to implement some refurbishing because I couldn't ride with this bicycle anymore. So I spent 5 days with refurbishing and repairing, which was very efficient because the bike became in really good shape after that. So I have already been traveling at least 1 month in Pakistan, and I realized that this country is very corrupt. In fact, it is very corrupt, and you can manage to do everything with money. It's even written in the driver's license that say no to corruption. It's funny. So when I wanted to exit the country and enter India, at the borderline, they stopped me and they said that I cannot go any further because I don't have an entry stamp. But there was money in my passport, of course, because it's absolutely normal, as I said, in Central Asia that you travel with a bribe in the passport to enter the country more easily. So they had a problem and they drove me to an investigation and they suspected me as a spy. So I ended up in a jail, and I spent 4 months in Pakistani jail. Well, there were some problems with the communication. The embassy of Hungary in Islamabad, they only got the information after almost a week. After I was admitted in the jail, but they helped me a lot, and all the foreign affairs of Hungary, they helped me, and finally they could get me out of the jail. This is, I think many of you know, this is Amritsar, the Golden Temple. So finally I could cross the border and I could enter India, the last country to travel through. And this is the same point where Alexander Choma entered the country. Well, Alexander was also arrested in North India. He was in Sabatu, right next to Shimla, where they suspected him also as a spy, as a, I think, Russian spy. So he was also arrested for a couple of months. So well, he also entered Amritsar, and he kept on walking towards the Himalayas to be able to enter Tibet and proceed to Mongolia. I also rode my bike north to enter the Himalayas, and when I reached Manali, I had this amazing feeling, and I had this possibility to ride my bike between these amazing snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas, and I intended to enter the valley of Zanskar, because there are two places there which are really remarkable for Alexander Choma. They are called Zangla and Puktal. These are two monasteries where Choma started the researches about the Tibetan language, and he started to write the Tibetan English dictionary. So I also wanted to enter, and I had to cross the Rotangla and Shingula. These are high altitude mountain passes, and I wanted to do ski mountaineering in those areas. But I was banned from doing so, because at the RDM office they said it is suicide. I cannot go through these mountain passes, even though I told them that I'm a ski mountaineer and I know how to move between the mountains even solely. So I decided to change my way and make a plan B. So I went to Kanam, and on the road there was a road construction. I had to stop my bike for 2 hours, and there were people around me. They were really intrigued about me, and they asked me the general question where I'm from, and I said I'm from Hungary. Their answer was, "God bless Hungarians." There was a Hungarian living in my village 200 years ago, and I asked them, "Okay, who was him?" They said, "Choma Koros." They knew his name, and that's a fact. It's written on the door of the Gompa in Kanam, in the village of Kanam. So the Buddhist monastery has the name on the door, at the entrance door, and these Buddhist monks were very friendly with me, and they hosted me, and they said that I can set up my tent on the roof of the monastery. So finally I slept here, and I woke up to this view, the same view as Choma Koros woke up every day, every single day. This is the door of his room, and I put a national Hungarian flag, to express my to salute him and to express my respect towards him, and this was the kind of ritual I made here. After that, I left the Himalayas. Unfortunately, I had to leave the Himalayas and go back to the flatlands. Of course, I prefer riding on the mountains. Well, it's hard, but it really deserves. But I had to go to the Ganga Valley to enter Delhi, Agra, and proceed to Varanasi, because I had to go to Darjeeling, which is the place where Alexander Choma was buried. So when I was riding on the Ganga Valley, there were some problems. The restaurants and the accommodations stopped working. They said that they will close it. Even they closed the um, touristic things like Taj Mahal. So I couldn't enter Taj Mahal. I could only visit it from outside, and I could only see it from outside. And finally, India decided to close everything, and they made a whole lockdown, an entire lockdown, which was I think a really unmature decision, because there were only 65, or there was a number under 100 people who died in this virus, and yeah, as everyone knows, the population is 1.3 billion, and well, they closed the whole country because of less than 100 death cases, and they decided to put me in a COVID-19 ward, which was a quarantine in Chapra city, which is in Bihar. They said it's going to be only a PCR test, and I can continue my journey the real next day, and there will be no issues. But finally, I ended up there, and I had to stay 8 weeks. Then I absolutely got mad. I was quarantined here, but I saw that in practice everyone is outside in the street. So that was a really bad feeling that I'm the only one who has to stay inside between the walls, but everyone is in the streets. So and of course in these conditions it was really bad to stay those days and weeks. I also had a theft. My passport was stolen and my money was stolen, and I redeemed them in burnt conditions. And yeah, this is the yard. This is the backyard of the hospital. Sometimes they let me out. There were pigs in the backyard. It was really funny. So after 9 weeks, they let me go, and some of the police officers, they presented me these laces of flowers, because they said that I'm I think they said that I'm a hero, that I could survive these things. And the last section was in West Bengal, and I had to enter West Bengal from Bihar at Siliguri. And when I wanted to enter West Bengal, then they stopped me and they banned me from entering, because as they said, that I was not an Indian person, and that was the only problem, because everyone who was from India, they could cross the border of West Bengal and Bihar, and they even didn't stop those people. But I was not Indian, I was from Europe, so they said I cannot cross the border. So I used this disguise. I used a kurta, and I put some scarf on my head, and I used a mask. And yeah, I was traveling as an Indian, and I tried to behave as an Indian. It was not easy, but I tried to have also this Indian type of English accent. And finally, I could proceed the journey, and I could walk up to Darjeeling, where I ended the expedition. In Darjeeling, I could find the cemetery, the old cemetery, and when I entered there, it was a huge, it was a massive apocalypse, or how to say. I mean, I felt that the expedition is over. It was very hard, especially the last part. It was very hard mentally to keep on, and to keep motivated to end to determine the trip when I was more than 8 weeks in the hospital. So finally, I made my respect, and I set these tricolor stripes on Alexander Choma's tomb, and finally I could plant those walnuts in the soil next to the grave. So that's how I finally got done with the expedition. In my perception, Alexander Choma's labor and his willpower was absolutely amazing, and I think this can give us a lot of power and motivation to reach our goals, because you can have results or excuses, not both. I'm sure about it. And Alexander was the person who had results, and he didn't have excuses. He had willpower and he had the strength. So let his picture and let his labor motivate us and inspire us to reach our goals. Thank you very much for attending.
Oh, thank you very, very much, Mr. Victor Jico. It's an excellent narration of this
Thank you very much.
entire experience of expedition in brief, but very revealing. And in spite of all the odds, that he could ultimately make it, just like Choma, as he was. But before anybody wants to raise any clarification or by way of any subsequent observation, let me just ask one question. Victor, since Choma was haunted by a question from his very boyhood, he wanted to locate the place of his people, that is Magyar tribe, somewhere in Central Asia.
Right.
And that question haunted him very much, which really prompted him to take up this journey. But in the process, he also did a lot of academic activities. But in
Yes.
your case, what prompted you to follow this path? Is it only to follow the track as used by Choma only for expedition, or what else?
Of course, this is a passion of mine. I did it by passion, not only because of respecting Alexander Choma. I did it with passion. I did it also for exploring these parts of Asia for myself, and I did it for Alexander Choma because I really respect this person, this person from Hungary, and I wanted to salute him and make his labor come back into the people's mind, to motivate people, to inspire people, to be a manifestor, to reveal dreams, and to make things come true.
Okay, fine. So may I now request the persons present in this webinar, if anybody has anything to seek by way of clarification or any observation. Dr. Mukherjee, would you please? Dr. Mukherjee?
Yeah. I have a small question for Victor. How do you return from India?
I returned by repatriation flight because there were no commercial flights at the time, and yeah, the embassy helped me a lot. The Hungarian embassy, they provided me a kind of insider link to get this repatriation flight ticket. So first I went to Patna from Darjeeling to the capital of Bihar, and then I could got a domestic flight to Mumbai, and then from there, I had this repatriation flight back to Europe.
That's it. That's it. Mr. Tuhin Kumar, may I kindly request you, since you had stopped suddenly, in order to allow Mr. Victor Jiko first to exhaust himself. So I think now it could be your turn to further elaborate certain thing, which would be complementary to Victor's observation.
We can't hear you.
Ambassador, please unmute yourself.
Yes. Yeah. So I realized that most of the interesting part actually has to come from Victor's presentation. Therefore, I did not want to take up too much of time myself and wanted to
That's
give
right.
as much time as
Yes.
possible to Victor himself, so
Yeah.
that he can give this out in detail.
Right.
But now that you have kindly given me some time, let me just briefly mention that after Victor came back, and of course I was closely tracking this not only personally from the embassy, but also through our friends in Bihar government and also through the Hungarian embassy in Delhi, because the ambassador of Hungary in India is again a very close friend of mine. So when Victor came back, of course, I realized that this was such a powerful story to be told and retold many times, and therefore I requested that he visits embassy, and also I requested the foreign office there. At that point of time, Dr. Emilia Fabian, she was the Director General, and we requested her that if she could come to a function organized by the embassy, where we could, of course, honor Victor for his adventures and also honor his journey in the presence of other people there. So this was one thing that we did when he came back. Then subsequently, also on several occasions, we went to the TV station where we featured Victor together with some very popular anchors there. And again, the purpose in doing all this was that this was, on all accounts, this would be an extremely powerful story of a person who would be facing so much of hardship and tough journey, but still pursue on his journey towards India. And again, ending at this memorial in Darjeeling, laying ribbons which were carried from the point of where legendary Chuma Korosi was born, carrying it from there and taking it to his destination in Darjeeling. This was very, very powerful story. So that was one big reason, I think, why I wanted again to come into this process, to meet Victor, to honor him when he came back in Hungary. And as I was saying in the beginning, that in any such a story, what finally comes into play for an embassy, all our work, what we are doing is actually creating some of those small pieces that can go towards founding friendship between two countries. And we do multiple things. We engage in visits, we are doing cultural interactions, we are doing business meetings, we are promoting interaction diverse areas. But the basic purpose is to bring people of two countries together and to strengthen the bonds of friendship. Now, our task was made so much more easier by what Victor did, was because one, he rekindled this old story of Chuma Korosi, which many people may have forgotten, but he brought the story back. And second is that he again created an example for future generations to come, because future generations always look towards some examples, some icons. And that was one thing which he did in his pictures, on Instagram, in his stories, in Facebook, and of course, in his YouTube and other videos and social media presence. Victor has now brought back all those things again back between India and Hungary. And this is what I wanted to say in the end, that in his own ways, in his pictures and in his social media, now Victor has further strengthened the friendship between India and Hungary. I would probably just want to end here again because there is this story can be told and retold in many ways, but I would just briefly summarize that in his journey we have found a modern day story for friendship between India and Hungary, and therefore I would like to congratulate him. I'd like to thank ISCS for organizing this seminar, in which we are able to not only facilitate him, but also are able to reminisce this journey. And also like to thank all the participants who are present here, including chairman of the Asia Society there, for organizing this seminar. And from my side, personally, from ICCR, and from also in my capacity as former ambassador to Hungary, I would like to congratulate everybody who has joined in this seminar today. So once again, thank you very much for organizing this.
Thank you, thank you. So I'm not sure how long we can continue, Dr. Mukherjee.
Within 5 minutes, we will conclude, sir.
Okay, in that case, before anybody takes up the floor, let me share with you one or two things. Within this last couple of months, Ambassador of Hungary to India visited Asiatic Society, and then the Director of Culture, there is perhaps one Institute of Cultural Studies of Hungary in Delhi, and people from there made contact with us for putting up an exhibition. So we did that. And recently, on the occasion of 180th death anniversary, they wanted us also to join them in Darjeeling cemetery. Personally, because of the prevailing situation, we could not go, but we had sent our tributes, and that was, placed there in appropriate manner. And my intervention was also telecast probably. And what I would expect Mr. Vico, whether he could write down this whole experience in the form of a presentation, so that I would take the first liberty of getting it published in the quarterly journal of the Asiatic Society for the benefits of its members, not only for its members, but to the huge number of academia who take interest in this sort of collaborative project between Hungary and India. And as I had discussed with the Honorable His Excellency, the Ambassador of Hungary to India, that we can think of couple of collaborative academic programs, and one or two we have already initiated. And now with Mr. Tuhin Kumar in place of ICCR and Dr. Arenjo Mukherjee being instrumental in the whole arrangement of this kind of programs, we can think of collaborative program with Asiatic Society, ICCR, and Institute for Cultural and Social and Cultural Studies, and all that. And if we, I don't feel happy to conclude within minutes about Choma, because it's a wonderful character, wonderful experience, wonderful presentations, contributions. We have not gone into the details of those, what he had done for us, for the entire academic community of the world. As the founder, president of the Asiatic Society, Sir William Jones, he was instrumental in getting this Oriental studies established or re-established in the European context. And Choma did the same thing by way of not only collecting the huge amount of Tibetan manuscripts, and in fact, initiating a whole range of academic activities, and from whom followed this very term Tibetology, about Tibetan history, Tibetan literature, Tibetan religion. And it is he whose writings had taken us to the West in terms of the contributions of Buddha's tenet of the entire philosophical tenets of Buddha and like that. So it was a marvelous character who requires a whole day, even not one day is not sufficient to exhaust about his contribution while remaining in India, especially in Asiatic Society. I think occasion will come back again to us to have this kind of discussions or seminar or workshop, whatever, you can think aloud. And with this, I would conclude my part.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Chakraborty. I, on behalf of Institute of Social and Cultural Studies, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all of the guests of today's webinar. A big thank you to Ambassador Tuhin Kumar, DG ICCR, and former Ambassador of India to Hungary, for his efforts towards a keynote speaker of today's webinar, without whose help and advice this beautiful program could not have been organized today. We are very much grateful to him. We would like to extend a special thanks to Chair of today's webinar, Dr. Satyabrat Chakraborty, General Secretary, Asiatic Society, Kolkata, who has enhanced the relevance of this beautiful event today through his thought-provoking and interesting comments. We are very grateful to him. I also wish to express my gratitude, last but not the least, the main attraction of today's webinar, Mr. Victor Zico, who is a bike traveler, passionate climber, mountaineer, photographer, videographer, etc., etc. We have been fascinated by his speech. We know he is very busy. However, the Institute is very grateful that he came to our webinar at our initiative and shared with us his very interesting experience of his bike journey. We will upload this webinar at our YouTube channel, our Facebook, and we will promote this thing, his activity, his work in media and social media also. Thank you all the participants for attending today's webinar. Good day, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So
Have a great day.
this is concluded.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Kankana ma'am.
Yes, tell me.
Ma'am, I had a question regarding the write-up which we are supposed to submit on the
Okay.
10th of June. Can I ask you?
Yeah, what?
Ma'am, it's regarding the word limit and where are we supposed to do it? Like, can we do it, can we type it out or we have to write it down?
No, you have to type it out and send it to us.
Okay, ma'am. And what about the word limit?
1200 to 1500.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.